the only brown face in the crowd of mine. They don't see themselves as part of the United Kingdom. They don't want to belong. And if anything, so remembrance itself becomes an act of betrayal against fellow Muslims abroad. It is the story of my family in this country is a story of service.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Nick Talks. This episode's always amazing, always returning guest, good friend of mine, Raja Mir. How you doing, Raja?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I am good. Let's start this podcast today with something we've never talked about before, because obviously we always talk about the grooming gangs and that topic, which needs talking about. So I'm not bored of that topic. We can never talk about that topic enough. But you put a tweet out the other day. I think it was Sunday. You'd just been to the Remembrance Day event, probably where you live, Oldham Way. And you put a picture of you and a gentleman with his war medals on, his service medals. And
yeah, a friend of mine, Gary Tarbuck, a very good friend of mine. Yeah, ex-serviceman. Yeah, his father, his grandfather were Labour Party councillors in the town. So for some context, yeah, historical Labour, but like so many of the white working class have been abandoned by them. Yeah, but he's a war veteran, decorated, as you can see, a decorated war veteran.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we may criticise Labour today, but 100 years ago, the Labour Party was needed. It was absolutely needed to support and be the voice of the working class people. But 30, 40 years ago, they abandoned the working class people in this country. But your comment on that was basically, I'm paraphrasing, so correct me if you don't want it paraphrased this way.
No, you go for it, and I'll join in. Don't worry about
it. But your comment was, where are all the brown faces? We're here celebrating and remembering the soldiers who died in the wars to keep us free. We can argue, are we free anymore? But different argument. And your point was, where are all the brown faces? Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I mean, my position on this is I am increasingly concerned. I think those of you listen can see that I'm not riding a bandwagon on this. I'm not just pandering a narrative, to a narrative. These are my genuine feelings as someone who lives and breathes in these communities. I think if anything sets me apart, Nick, is that I've operated in the policy world where you and I come from, but I live in these places. I came from these places and I go back and live in these places. And as well as what I see around me, I'm also privy to conversations and I have a feel. I have a feel for what's taking place. And my concern is this. Events such as Remembrance are anchor points in the story of our nation. Remembrance Sunday, the anchor points. And I go to Remembrance. I make a point of going to Remembrance, not least because I have immediate family members who served. The story of my family in this country is a story of service. My father came here because he served in the Navy. I mean, it's no more complicated than that. And he would, at Remembrance, I remember him and his friends. So these are the first generation ethnic minorities. They, and back then on Sunday, everything was shut on a Sunday as well, wasn't it? So it was a different world back then. But even back then, there was respect towards Remembrance Sunday. And I remember towards the end of his life, and he couldn't get out in the same way, there were moments in our house that demanded silence. As children growing up, and you don't really understand what's going on, and Remembrance Sunday was one of them. And the first wave of migrants, whether they were Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Caribbean, African Caribbean, they all latched onto those events as belonging to them, and they had a responsibility to honor and pay tribute in the same way they had the love for the Queen, for instance, because we are, when you look from the outside in and from a distance, we can just say, oh, immigrants, immigrants, immigrants. But there should have been or have been different types of immigrants. There are those who were of the Commonwealth, for instance, who have had historically a very different outlook to the United Kingdom and seen it as a motherland whose values and traditions and culture was to be held on a higher level. And then we have, I would argue, we have a newer wave of immigrants who just want to take advantage and actually want to impose their beliefs and their values on us rather than come here because they belong. And Remembrance Sunday for me, every time I go, it's the same. And I came back a few years ago, I came back to them a few years ago. Maybe I didn't notice it back then, but it was there. It's always been there, but it's more pronounced now than ever because the town's minority community is increasing in population. So we're not 5% anymore. You're not 10%. If the population was insignificantly small and they're not represented at these events, you'd say, okay, there's not many of them here. But the population is what now, 30% or so and growing, particularly amongst the younger generation. Not a single face. The only faces that were there were the ones who had to be there. Like the politicians and those who had a specific role to play. And what I watched and looked on is year on year it's the same. And I went back and had some conversations with people I knew. And it was very clear to this. And I can only speak from my own experiences. I can't speak on anyone else's behalf, but my experiences of this, and it's what I shared, is that they won't even take the 2 minutes. They don't see themselves as part of the United Kingdom. They don't want to belong. And if anything, they see their Muslim identity as the most dominant identity. And they happen to, instead of being British citizens who happen to be Muslims, these are Muslims who happen to live in Britain.
Yeah.
Reversal is significant. And it's not just in Oldham, Nick. It is right across the country. This pattern extends right across the country. And you've got to also put this in context. These Muslim communities, our Muslim communities, if you want to use that term, they are so effective in mobilizing events. They are so effective. You see them from Palestine and Kashmir and anti-government type of demonstrations. If there's an injustice of any form or a suspect of injustice, thousands can be mobilized just like that, Nick. And that's not a criticism. In fact, that's a weakness on our part because we can't do the same, but these people, they can mobilize thousands. And yet and I went to the main service in Oldham Town Centre, the main service in Oldham Town Centre. It was very clear to me as I looked around, and I made a point this year of looking around. The only brown face in the crowd was mine.
Yeah, this is what I take away from that, and I've noticed this over a decade now at different events, which we'll get into. But isn't the problem, and this isn't just a Muslim, Pakistani, Bangladeshi problem. This is lots of the minorities who live in the country. We seem to have got to a stage where Remembrance Day. Let's talk about Remembrance Day. Obviously, Remembrance Day. That's your history. That's your tradition. That's not our history, our tradition. We have a different history to you and different traditions to you. And what they actually mean is we still hark back to the ancient land. That's our history. That's our tradition. And they seem to be, maybe not purposely, but it's widening that divide.
It's more than that. It's more than that. I buy that argument with some of the elders who I speak to in my community or people my age. You said these are the traditions of the English Raja, they're the traditions of the British, they're not our traditions. Yeah. So we feel uncomfortable or we don't feel as though, it's something that we need to engage in. Those are neutral positions to hold, I think. I don't think there's any malice in that. I mean, it's not what I'd like, but there's no malice in that. There's malice in something else. There's a malice in the rise of political Islam. It's an ideological lens, and British civic rituals, they consider, are not neutral acts of remembrance. Political Islam reinterprets these as an endorsement of an oppressive state. So the British military actions become aggression against the Ummah. And that's the difference here, Nick. So when I speak with the younger ones who are angrier, they're like, "Oh no, it's an attack on Islam," and that's a subtle but significant difference.
So we're in a worse position than I thought.
Our history becomes a record of imperial crimes, and the poppy that we wear, that none of them wear, Have a look. None of them were. Forget just Remembrance Sunday. Have a look across the board. None of them were. The poppy becomes not a symbol of sacrifice, but it is an emblem of complicity. And that's what I wrote. So remembrance itself becomes an act of betrayal against fellow Muslims abroad. They see the Ummah as the overriding, sense of belonging that they have, or duty they have. And that, my friend, is where we now are. This isn't just that ambivalent, this is your history, not our history. Neutral at best, saddened by it, but there's no malice in it. This is something else. This is aggressive.
This is worse than I thought. I thought it was basically apathy. That's your traditions. We don't really want to integrate. We live here now. This is our home. We'll live the way we want to, and always hark back to the ancient home. I didn't realize it was as bad as this. Um, but we also see it in other communities who are not Muslim. I really noticed it at the funeral of the Queen, the late Queen, when she laid in state in London, and we had people queuing for 5, 6, 7 hours to pay respect. And you look at those queues, and it was almost 99% white people. There was no black people, no people who looked Caribbean, no Asians. I mean, the BBC would always focus in on somebody who wasn't white, and the guy who always wears the Union Jack suit with the Union Jack hat, a black guy, they always focused in on him, and good for him. But it was if they were searching the crowd for someone who was not white to emphasize the message. But when the cameras pulled back, it was sea of white faces. And that made me think.
This is in a city that is not majority white in the way it was, is it?
Absolutely.
It's Sadiq Khan's London, yeah?
Yeah, I think white British now is something like 33, 35% in London. Um, so I looked at that and went, where are all the brown and black faces? Because it can't just be white people who are connected to the monarchy, connected to this island, wanting it to succeed and wanting it to be home. And it just showed me that our level of integration, which we've never really tried, but has failed because people didn't see the death of the Queen as the next chapter on this island's history. What did you see at that time?
I saw it as integration having comprehensively failed. Here is a monarch who, regardless of what you think of the monarchy, she has been a feature of this nation and the and the place in the story of our nation. And the crowds that gathered, and I just looked on it, and I know that it saddens me, Nick, because we failed. The multicultural experiment has failed. We've not been assertive enough in making sure that people what we've been is ambivalent. Oh, you can come here, live here, develop in your own ways, and this melting pot, and we'll take from you, and it won't it all be nice. But if we don't have an underlying foundation that brings us all together under the banner of the national flag, then what are we? What story do we tell our children? We become it, and he did it, didn't he? And then he backtracked because he did it himself. Keir Starmer did it himself, and then he backtracked when he made reference to the island of strangers. And then he backtracked, and someone wrote him that speech because he was trying to engage with those of us who feel this way. And then his judgment got the better of him. He's back to how he was, and the programming kicked back in, and it was a racist and far right. But we have got to accept that what we have tried has failed to integrate the minority communities who live here and have established themselves here. And if we continue on that journey, then these anchor points, the state, funerals, Remembrance Sunday, they will become conflict, pressure points. They'll become pressure points, areas of conflict, because what will happen next is that these people will oppose these events. One thing you opt out of them, And you opt out for two reasons. One is it's not ours, so we feel we don't feel we should be go over, which I'm ambivalent. I'm towards, but I don't agree with. The other one is more political, and we're against that. Well, then if you're against that, what happens next? How long before, Nick, we hear one of those sectarian MPs stand up and claim Remembrance Sunday is racist and a mark of imperialism, and we need to cancel it? How long before those conversations actually take place? And then how long before we see counter demonstrations?
Mm. That's already started to some extent, not necessarily from the Muslim angle, but every year we see more and more people wearing white poppies,
Yeah.
which I think is a sign of cowardice, just like a white feather, sign of cowardice. A few years ago, people introduced pride poppies to celebrate the gay people who died in war, and it's already beginning to split along identity politics. But then the next stage then is just what you've said, the rejection of remembrance altogether. If we can't come together as a nation to remember the people who sacrificed their lives so we could live in freedom and live in this country, and the people who sacrificed their lives were from all over the world. Look at the true world.
400,000 Muslim soldiers served in the First World War alone.
Exactly. So
Men from the Punjab Regiment, the Frontier Force Regiment, the 5th Gurkha Rifles. Yeah.
And that should be pulling everybody together, because this isn't just about white British soldiers. This is about the soldiers who fought for the British Empire.
They had a saying, the soldiers who fought, because there's a counter narrative by some of those who want to present the empire was evil and all sorts. A lot of the soldiers who served went and served, and they used the term, "I've tasted the salt," and what that meant was, I've had the good stuff that empire has brought us, that the British nation has brought us to where I am in the world, And a lot of these people were oppressed. We freed them. They were oppressed where were living. They were as good as slaves, and they had a duty and a responsibility. So they'd use the term "taste the salt." We've tasted the salt, and now we have the responsibility. And they came and served willingly.
Hmm? I mean, especially in World War II.
Alternate story that's been told of somehow being gang pressed and forced and all. It's not true, Nick.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at World War II, the reason why the Indian subcontinent, to a certain extent, fought in World War II was to stop the Japanese. And nobody wanted to live under Japanese rule. Just go ask the.
Well, look at the rape camps in Burma. Look what they were doing.
Yeah, we managed to stop them in Burma. I mean, you see what they did in Burma, what they did in China, what they did to British prisoners of war. Nobody wanted to live under the Japanese. So they were fighting for themselves as well as the British Empire. But it was a world war. We're all in it together. And if we can't come together to remember the men who sacrificed their lives for the future generations, then we're in big trouble.
And this is my thing. I looked at Remembrance, the service where I went to, and I've gone to every year. And I'm looking at this, and my mind is working. I'm thinking, hold on, we should be teaching all of our children as part of the mandatory what's took place. Children from all the schools should be laying reefs. It should be, because as it is, it can't continue as it is, because it is going to be used against us, because we are forgetting our history, Nick. We are forgetting who we are. And we're embarrassed of who we are. And as a nation, that can't continue.
Let me ask you this about the remembrance you went to. Was it vastly overrepresented by older people?
No.
No. Oh, fantastic.
No. There was plenty of old people. I mean, I sat next to, I stood next to clearly a veteran. He was in a wheelchair, and blankets all around him, and his granddaughter had bought him. Most of them are working class, I would say, where I went to. Definitely that working, the middle classes weren't there, Nick. I think if we want to talk about it in the same way in a town such as mine, I think the middle classes were more likely in Tesco or the trip to IKEA. It was vastly working class, but of course that's the history of the of service, isn't it? It's the working class class communities who sacrificed, who came first. And yeah, my friends who went and died in Afghanistan, Iraq, they were working class kids.
So you saw lots of generations of people there, because the ones I've been to recently, another favourite of mine is Remembrance Day is going to die out because we're not attracting enough younger people.
I think there's something counter taking place. Where I am, I went to Oldham, but there's outlying towns like like Royton, Watershed. We've got because the town, the borough sent its children to serve. Oldham's a very proud working class town. Tens of thousands of our people went. So there's war memorials in each of the smaller towns, outlying towns. Royton was packed, absolutely packed with families. And my friend Lewis sent me a photograph, and it brought a tear to my eye. But again, obviously, almost exclusively white, but it was packed, and it was just. I think we are fighting back, and we are understanding the value of what events such as Remembrance means to us, and how we need to fight to protect them. I think counter to what's taking place with those who are opting out and the political left trying to distance themselves or reshape the narrative. The rest of us, whose families, who have an affiliation with Remembrance and everything it stands for, I think what's taking place now is where in the past people perhaps might not have gone to these events, more and more are going to these events.
Oh,
We just need a wider range of more people going to the events. Yeah.
yeah. That's cheered me up. I hope that carries on. Roger, this is another issue that you didn't have to speak about, you didn't have to get involved in, but you have done. This is just as complicated. It's not as serious, but it's just as complicated as the grooming gangs. And thank you for speaking out about it. Thanks for raising it.
No, thank you. And I think you can see. I mean, it's all interconnected, Nick. These issues don't sit in silos; they overlap with each other, and there's so many layers to this. And I find myself in a position where, okay, Raja, you've got 20 years, 25 years of doing this work, and it's a lived experience as well as understanding the policy and the politics. For me, it's a lived experience, and I find myself in a place where I hope I can articulate some of this so people understand and stay positive. That actually, we first of all we need to talk about these issues, and we need to talk about them in a way where the genuine extremists can't hijack it, and then we can deal with it. And I am concerned. I am deeply concerned about the Muslim youth in this country and how their views and opinions are more aligned with a political Islam ideology than with the values, the liberal values that shape our democracy.
Spot on. And that's generational work we need to do as a country if we're going to overcome that. But next year, Raja, I will try my best to attend the Remembrance that you go to.
Oh, turn up, come to the one in Oldham or come to the one in Royton and see. You'll see.
Yeah, I'll do my best next year to go to one of them. Raja, as always, thank you much for the discussion, and let's do this again soon.
Thank you.